Hi everyone, thanks for visiting my channel. If you are new here, welcome. I'm Carol and I'm so glad that you stopped by. I hope you will consider subscribing, like and share my videos, and follow me on social media. I will leave all the links in the description box below. So today we are going to be talking about pie crust. We have Thanksgiving coming up next week. I know I'm a little late getting this video out, but still plenty of time for you to watch it and learn how to make a delicious and foolproof pie crust. There are a lot of different ways to make pie crust, and to be honest, I've made almost all of them, but this is my favorite way to make pie crust. I find that the never fail pie crust recipe never lets me down. It tastes fantastic and it's really easy to make. So many of you have shared with me that you struggle with pie crust, and I know from personal experience that the struggle is real, but I think you'll find that this recipe is really easy to work with and it's very foolproof in my opinion. Now, the thing that we don't ever want to happen with pie crust, and was what typically happens, is it can get tough. So there are some ways to prevent that from happening, and they are part of the never fail pie crust recipe, which is why I enjoy it so much. The other thing that I like about it is a larger pie crust recipe. So it makes 4 thin crusts, or I like to divide it in thirds because I have a deep dish pie pan. This is my Henry Emil pie plate from I bought mine at King Arthur Baking, but I will leave a link to it in case you're interested in it. Anyway, if you have a deeper dish pie pan like what I have, you're going to want to divide this into thirds instead of into fourths. The other thing that I wanted to talk just briefly about is the King Arthur's Baking Companion. This has a lot of terrific information in it regarding pie crust. All kinds of great information about baking in general, but there's a wonderful section in here that explains everything you need to know about making pie crust if you want all the details. I'm not going to share all the details, but I did highlight a few things that I think are important to understand when you're making pie crust that I thought that you would find interesting and also be helpful to you in your journey to the perfect crust. So just a couple of things. They talk about ingredients. Most pie crust recipes use all-purpose flour. You can use pastry flour, or you can use a combination of pastry flour and all-purpose flour. But we're going to be using all-purpose flour. They do go into detail in here about what types of flour that you should use and which ones work better. We're going to use all-purpose. The second ingredient is salt. Salt plays 2 roles. It adds flavor, obviously. That's why we use salt most of the time in most of our dishes, whether it's baking or cooking. But second, it also firms up the gluten in the crust ever so slightly, making it easier to handle. So salt is important. Sugar is an ingredient that is not included in all recipes. It is included in the recipe that I'm going to be sharing with you. Sugar added to pie crust dough is for flavor and for browning. I like it. I think it adds just a tiny bit of flavor to it. Pie crust can be a little bit bland. So I think the sugar just enhances the flavor, so that is part of my recipe. Acids like buttermilk, vinegar, or lemon juice, those are the magic ingredients that help prevent the gluten from forming in your dough, which is what makes your dough tough, which is what we don't want. We want a tender, flaky crust. So acids are added for that reason. They break down the protein in the flour, so they help to keep the crust tender. Acids also help to prevent your dough from turning gray. Now, if you've ever refrigerated pie dough for a few days, you may have noticed that it will turn gray on you, and that's just oxidation that's happening. They recommend that when you refrigerate pie dough, if you're going to make it ahead of time, that you don't refrigerate it for any more than 36 hours. If you need to refrigerate it longer than that, you should freeze it instead. But the acids help prevent that, as well as making your crust tender. We are going to be using vinegar in the recipe I'm going to be sharing with you. And just as an FYI, I thought this was interesting. I've never tried it, but it says, in addition, adding dried buttermilk powder to a crust enhances its flavor. So if you are a person who keeps dried buttermilk on hand, you can add it to your pie crust for a little bit of extra flavor. Eggs or egg yolks, those are in some pie crust recipes. We're going to be using them today. We're going to be using 1 whole egg in our pie crust. Adding a slightly beaten egg as part of the crust liquid will give you a sturdier crust without making it tough. Sorry, I had to adjust my lighting a little bit there. So we're going to be adding the egg also in this recipe. So if you've ever struggled with your crust cracking or you have a hard time rolling it out, the egg is going to help with that. Now, fats. You can use a number of different ones. There's lard, there's shortening, there's butter. The recipe I'm going to be sharing uses a combination of shortening and butter. Fat plays two roles. First, it is to coat the flour, thereby inhibiting the gluten development and creating tenderness. And the second role, obviously, is to create flakiness. So in this recipe, we are going to get the best of both worlds, in my opinion. Shortening makes a wonderful, tender, flaky crust, but I also like to add butter because butter adds flavor as well as some really nice flakiness. So the combination of the two, you get fantastic flavor, which shortening does not add. It does make it nice and flaky, but it does not add any flavor unless you use butter flavor, and then it's just all imitation flavoring, which I don't care for. So I add real butter also. So our recipe includes both. And then your last ingredient is going to be water. Of course, you always want to use really cold or ice water. Water binds the pie crust dough, activating its gluten so it holds together. Another note that I want to make regarding the fat, and I found that this is really interesting, and I've been making my pie crust like this since then. Combining flour with half of the fat thoroughly, then combining with the remaining fat and leaving it in larger chunks, pea size or even larger, will yield a really nice flaky crust. I'm gonna bring you in close and we're gonna get started. Okay guys, here we go. I have 4 cups of flour. Make sure you measure accurately. You want to spoon your flour in and level it off with a knife. So we're going to start with 4 cups of flour, and we're going to add 1 tablespoon of sugar and a teaspoon and a half of salt. And I'm just going to use my pastry cutter and just combine that really well. Then we are going to cut in 1 1/4 cups of shortening. And we want to cut it in so that it's pretty fine. We want the shortening to coat most of the flour. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. You want it to resemble coarse sand, but you want it fairly fine in texture. So now we are going to add our butter. We need a 1/2 cup of butter, and I have cut it into 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch pats. Now the butter we want to leave in a little bit bigger chunks. So I'm going to use my pastry cutter again and work in my butter. And if you want to, and this is what I do sometimes, sometimes I just use my hands because it's easier for my fingers to get it to the size that I want it. And we want it to be in bigger chunks, and we want it to be kind of flat. We want to flatten out some of the pats of butter. Okay, once you get your butter incorporated, you don't want to work with it too much, and you do want larger chunks than what we did the first time. And that's why I like to use my fingers. It just helps me to get it the texture that I'm looking for. And you can tell that it's bigger than what we did the first time with using just the shortening. So now we are ready to add our liquid. So now we're going to take a 1/2 cup of water, and I'm going to add 1 large beaten egg. And I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. You can use whatever vinegar you want. Most people have white vinegar on hand. Make sure your water is ice cold. And then we are going to add all of that to our dry ingredients. I like to just use a fork and just gently give it a stir, kind of like folding. I go under and over. I try not to overwork it. Again, we're using the vinegar, which is going to help keep our crust nice and flaky and tender, but you still don't want to overwork it if you can help it. And you just want to mix it till you don't have any more dry patches. Now what we want to do is refrigerate our dough for about 30 minutes. I like to divide mine in thirds. This will make 4 thin pie crusts. Okay, once you have it divided out to your liking, then I just fold over my plastic wrap and press it down to form a disc. And then you want to refrigerate them for about 30 minutes. Then I'm gonna bring you back and show you how to roll it out. Okay guys, here we go. I have chilled my dough for about 30 minutes. I have found that that's just about the right amount of time for my dough to be perfectly chilled and easy to work with. So what I do is I just lightly flour my surface, lightly flour my rolling pin, take my dough out, lay it on my surface, and then I kind of twist it a little bit around, get it nice and round, redistribute my flour, put it back down, and then gently roll it out. If it starts to stick, you can always add a little more flour. And when I get it about half of the size that I want it, then I pick it up and I flip it over just to make just an extra step to make sure that it's not going to stick. Add a little more flour if I need to. Make it round again. And again, you just want to be really gentle, just a nice gentle pressure. Then once you get it rolled out to the thickness and the size that you want it, see all those beautiful chunks of butter? I'm not sure if you can see that real well, but they're just, it's beautifully marbled with butter. I just take it and fold it in half. And then fold it over again. And then move it to my pie plate. And then we're just going to gently unfold it. If it starts to tear, no worries, just push it back together. It's fine. And I know some people like to trim off all of their extra dough. I tend to just leave mine. And then I just kind of pinch it all together all the way around because I enjoy crust. And then to make a fluted edge, I just do like this. Bring it in a little bit closer. Everybody has a different way of doing it. This is my method. And there you go. Perfect, easy pie crust. So how easy was that? Not hard, right? I have found, like I said, that 30 minutes is about the perfect amount of time for chilling. You can chill longer if you need to. If you chill for very long, your butter is going to get really hard, which is going to make it difficult to roll out. I would let it warm up to room temperature, not necessarily room temperature, but let it warm up at room temperature for a little bit until it's easy. It should roll out like a dream for you. This recipe is very foolproof. The egg in it helps to produce a nice sturdy crust, which makes it easy to roll out and move around. The vinegar is going to help prevent the gluten from forming and make sure that you have a nice tender flaky crust. I highly recommend that you get the King Arthur Baking Company, the Baker's Companion. Lots of wonderful information in here, and like I said, a great section on pie crust, different ways to make it, different methods, and I think eventually I will go over some of the other methods of making pie crust. They use a food processor in some of them. They also use tell you how to make it with a stand mixer, which is kind of interesting. So we may try those, and I'll add those to my channel as well. If you are interested in seeing how delicious, flaky, and wonderful this pie crust is, you can check it out on the video I did on apple pie. I will link it here and also in the description box below. But if you stick around and stay tuned for my next video, I'm going to show you how to make a delicious, stand out of the crowd cranberry apple pie. It is absolutely fantastic and it will knock your socks off. I'm going to be using this crust and you can see how delicious and beautiful it is. So stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for coming along with me today, guys. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them for me in the comment section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.